Okay, let's call to order our November 21st board meeting of the California Housing Financing Agency Board of Directors. Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Why don't we start with a roll call?
Ms. Avila Farias. Here. Ms. Gallagher. Secretary Ambassiani.
Present.
Mr. Gunning.
Here.
Mr. Hunter.
Here.
Ms. Johnson Hall. Mr. A.G. for Treasurer Ma.
Here.
Mr. Olmsted for
Here.
the Director of HCD.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Von Cook-Liebert for Secretary Podesta.
Here.
Mr. Prince.
Here.
Mr. Russell. Ms. Sotelo.
Here.
Ms. Hegg for Kate Gordon.
Here.
Ms. Miller for Kelly Bosler. Ms. Boatman Patterson.
Here.
And Chairman, we do have a quorum.
Excellent. Item number 2, has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our September 10th meeting? Any additions, corrections, comments? Seeing none, why don't we adopt those as per in the agenda? We don't need a motion, we can accept it. We're good. Item number 3, just one housekeeping item. Courtney is out there. If you do plan to speak on some of these items, she has these yellow slips. We need to get you down there and listed before you speak. So if you do want to make comments, make sure you see Courtney. I think with that, Tia, I turn it over to you.
Oh, Mike.
You get to talk.
So I have a couple of executive director marks and updates. You all might have been reading the papers and the recent commitments by some of our tech companies to invest in housing here in the state of California. Most recently, the Apple commitment of $2.5 billion. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how the broad kind of outline of some of that commitment. The Apple commitment was actually in basically 3 tranches, and their funding is coming from 2 sides of the house. So they have the money that is coming from what is their treasury, which is really money that they do not want any permanent impairment of their principal, and it really is an investment in which they would like to see a return. So it's their treasury. The other tranche is a tranche of philanthropy dollars in which it's just straight philanthropy. In the middle, there is a tranche that is administered by Treasury, but with some more flexibility in allowing those funds to have a longer duration and potentially a lower return. So the big tranche of funds that is coming from Treasury where they would like to see a return is $2 billion. There is $500 million, which is made up of a mix of land that Apple is donating or contributing for housing, and $200 million in which they're looking for potentially subordinate debt financing, in which they're working with regional and local partners. And then the peer philanthropy is about $50 million, which they have designated destination homes, and those funds are dedicated specifically for homeless programs. You've probably also heard about the Facebook's commitment of $250 million, which is to be pairing financing for public entities' excess properties to create private-public partnerships and to advance changes in development processes and the supply of housing. And so we're looking forward to working with all of those tech companies, and CalHFA may end up having some programs that utilize some of the tech company funds. And so when we have more details and have the terms of some of those programs, we will be bringing those to the board for review and comment. So that's our update on the tech companies. Secondly, I'd like to speak to coordination and alignment of state programs and state entities. This has been an awesome year for housing, but with new programs and a lot of new resources comes more difficult and complex alignment and working together. And this is something that we have been working on, at least during my tenure, for at least 5 years. So I call it, my example is building the airplane while we are flying it. You will recall that the AB 101, which was significant resources for housing, was signed on July 31st. Part of those significant resources did include $500 million in state tax credits. We have worked very closely with the Treasurer's Office. The Treasurer's Office hired leadership in both TCAC and CIDLAC in August. And so those leaders had to hit the ground running to try to implement legislation that had been signed on July 31st and have regs up and running by September, October. So I'm really trying to express to you all and the community how quickly we've been building this airplane while flying it. So while you're building the airplane while flying it, you try to be very communicative, open, and transparent with all of your partners. And we sometimes trip over one another, but that is why we have these board meetings. That is why we put things on open and transparent sunshine laws so that we can have robust discussions on those particular transactions. In addition to the emergency regs for the state tax credits being adopted in October, it became apparent in October that for the first time in almost 2 decades, that the bond allocations were going to go competitive. So I just would really like to stress to the board that staff is working double and triple time at every single one of the entities. And I haven't even touched on all of the funds that have gone over to my sister agency at HCD, where they are literally putting out NOFAs, it seems like every week. So I just want the community and you all to know that staff is aligned. Staff is coordinating. We are meeting with each other, if not weekly, monthly, weekly, on a regular basis, trying to align our programs and work together. And that is across all 4 of the state entities, HCD, CalHFA, TCAC, and CIDLAC. And so that is my update on the coordination and alignment of state programs. Third, as we roll into the discussion about the mixed income program, which you will hear later from the Director of Multifamily, and presenting those proposed changes, I want to be very clear about historically how we have aligned and worked with our sister partner at HCD. Historically, HCD and their programs have focused and targeted to income levels that range at 50% AMI and below. And although their income limits are somewhat higher in some of their programs, we have, as the state of California, have adopted a policy of helping our most vulnerable populations. CalHFA, on the other hand, has traditionally and historically helped 50% AMI and above, where we have usually tried to target our home ownership program to help that low to moderate income, and our multifamily programs, which have helped 50% AMI and above through either our tax-exempt bond financing. So this is how we have complemented one another. So when the governor came out with the MIP program and wanted to see us do the MIP program, it was to assist those income levels that had traditionally not been assisted with any state or federal financing, primarily those incomes of 60% AMI and above. Tax credits usually are only eligible up until 2017 to be able to provide subsidies for multifamily rental at 60% AMI and below. With the 2017 changes to the tax law, which allow us now to do income averaging, a tax credit unit above 60% AMI can utilize federal tax credits, but the overall development has to average at 60% AMI. So for every unit you build above 60% AMI to get eligible tax credits, you have to offset that with a unit at a lower income I. We aren't seeing a lot of income average units yet. And so I did have staff run the numbers for the new construction 4% deals for 2019. Of those deals, 28% of them were new construction. And the average AMI of 4% new construction deals runs about 50% AMI. So although income averaging allows us to go up to 60% AMI, Our deals in California, tax credit deals, have historically averaged at 50% AMI and below, because all of our programs have been incentivized and targeted to help our most deeply targeted and most vulnerable populations. And so the goal with the mixed income program was to move the scale to help 50, 60, 70, 80% AMI units to the extent they could apply for and use eligible tax credits, and to be able to now utilize state tax credits and that subsidy to help the low income units while incentivizing folks to bring in a smaller 10% tranche of either 60 to 120% units. And so I just want to give you that background and that framework so that you all understand the historical context of how we've worked together and how this program is to come in and complement programs that we have in the state of California. So with that said, I think I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, T. Questions?
Yeah, question. I apologize for late. I missed the beginning of you may have covered this, but the tech money that's
Sure,
coming in.
Michael. Make sure your
Sorry,
mic's on.
the tech money, how that feathers into this income targeting? I know you said there's a portion homeless.
So there's 3 tranches, and the majority of the money is coming from their treasury as opposed to their governmental relations and their philanthropy arm. Only 50 million of that commitment that Apple has made is pure philanthropy, and that is targeted all at homelessness, and the recipient of those funds is Destination Homes. The remainder is coming from their treasury, and a portion of that's coming from their treasury. CalHFA will be working on it on potential programs, and we'll be bringing that to the board.
Thank you, Tia. Lynn, you had a question?
Actually, just have a comment. I just want to commend Tia on the work with the tech companies. You know, we've known for the past couple of years that we're just not going to solve this housing crisis alone, and that we need to bring all the parties to the table. And I think this is just a really meaningful step in that direction. And just want to commend you for your leadership on this and really thinking through a model that is going to keep our partners activated and make sure that we have finding mutually beneficial solution. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And so I cannot take credit for this. He is not here today, but I'm going to give a shout out to Timothy Sue, who has been on long conversations with our tech partners. So Timothy Sue out there enjoying Hawaii right now. We give you a shout out.
That's right, and I just want to echo those comments because I know, Tia, you talked about how hard all the agencies are working, but it seems like you're doing that and this, and we know the governor's work as well, so kudos to you. Yeah, Preston, please.
So, Tia, I think you were getting kind of a little bit of a framework for a conversation that's going to happen later. Did you want to have a little bit of the policy conversation now, or do you want to wait for?
I think we should wait, and that way we can
wondering.
hear from the audience and the commenters and have a robust discussion.
Perfect. And then I would be remiss if I didn't also point out that some of those philanthropic organizations are giving money for affordable housing because they suffered losses in lawsuits for discrimination. So yes, they're doing wonderful stuff, but it's because they also did some really bad stuff to start with. So at least some of the philanthropic people. I just had to say that, sorry.
Good. Okay. Any other comments? Excellent. Then let's go ahead, and Don, I think you want to share some good news. Let's keep it rolling.
Good morning, Chair Gunning and members of the board. I'm Don Kavir, the agency's Chief Deputy Director, and this morning I'm joined by my colleague Lori Hamahashi, our agency's comptroller. And it is our great pleasure to announce that CalHFA has again received 2 awards for financial reporting from the Government Finance Officers Association, also known as GFOA. The first award is the Certificate for Achievement and Excellence for Financial Reporting, and the GFOA established their certificate program in 1945 to encourage and assist state and local governments to go beyond the minimum requirements of generally accepted accounting principles to prepare a comprehensive annual financial report that evidences the spirit of transparency and full disclosure. And my Vanna White here is showing that to you. This is to recognize governments that succeed in achieving that goal, and the report is submitted to select members of the GFOA professional staff as well as GFOA Special Review Committee, which is comprised of individuals that are experts in public sector financial reporting, and includes financial statement preparers, independent auditors, academics, and other financial professionals. The second award is the Popular Annual Financial Award. The GFOA established this award program in 1991 to encourage state and local governments to extract information from their very complex comprehensive annual financial report and put it in layman's terms so that people that don't have a financial reporting background can get something from it. And we are very excited because this is the second consecutive year that we've received both of these awards. And I just want to take a moment and acknowledge the work of our Fiscal Services Department, our Financing Department, and our Marketing Department, who all work very collaboratively together to make this happen. And so I think we have a few people here in the audience that represent those divisions, and I'd like them to stand and be recognized. And Lori's holding this giant piece of marble that weighs about 30 pounds. So this is our second. Right now, they got smart and they stopped sending you a plaque every year and started sending a medallion to add to the plaque. So just want to say thanks and give a shout out to our team. And I don't know if Oksana is in the audience.
Oksana, yeah.
And our marketing team over here. So thank you. So that's it. That's the big presentation. So.
Great, outstanding work, Lori, Don, and team. That's just super. Let's keep those medallions going.
Can I comment?
Please, Tia.
Can I say something real quick
Yes.
before you do? Because I know you're going to say more thoughtful things, but I just have to say that those of us on the industry side aspire for that award. So this, for those of you who don't know, who are up here, this is a really pretty big deal. And so from someone who aspires for it, I just say congratulations.
You want to hold it for a little bit?
I would. Can I hold
Can we all
it
just
for
take
the
a
meeting?
picture?
Well, why,
I'm
I'm sorry, why do you guys, help us appreciate?
Yeah, no, it is a recognition of the strong financial systems in place and report. It is a pretty darn big award for the behind the scenes stuff that happens within an organization. I'm hoping we might get one in the next year. So I mean, it's been a while that we've been trying. So I think it's just great.
You know what, thank you, Preston, for that, because I don't know that we always appreciate the work of staff, and I could not be more proud of Don and Lori and Oksana and their teams. It is a big deal.
It is.
Like, this is a big deal. So, in 2011, you all, some of you may have been, you were around, the Bureau of State Audits audited CalHFA and basically said, y'all are a hot mess. And you rubber stamp, and you need more open, transparent way of doing things. You need to be more open and transparent about your financials. You need to be more open and transparent about how you deal with your board and with the information. And so we have, since Don and I came on board, that has been one of our highest goals of making sure that we are open and transparent with you all, open and transparent with our financial partners. And for him to have gotten this award over the last 2 years speaks volumes to where we are as an organization when it comes to the strength of our financials and our operations. So thank you, Preston, for helping us to understand, but it really is kind of a big deal, and I'm so proud of them.
Great, well, I understand Frances is not here, so Don, I think you're
So I'm
still
going to be
in the batter box.
the new Francesc for a few minutes here. So a few quick words on legislative affairs. Francesc is currently in Los Angeles, and he's speaking on our behalf to the FHFA duty to serve listening sessions. But he wanted me to communicate a couple of things to the board. First, included on page 6 of your board package is a one-pager summarizing key pieces of state legislation that were completed in 2019, along with some other relevant highlights from the state budget impacting housing. And we hope you find the document to be useful, and he indicated that you should feel free to share it with anybody that you want, and also to contact him at any time if you want more information or detail surrounding some of these legislative initiatives. Secondly, he asked me to provide the board with information on an important piece of federal legislation, which is H.R. 3077, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act of 2019. This bill is the most important thing that Congress can do to help with the housing crisis in California, and there's a real opportunity to include this bill as a part of the year-end spending and tax package. Its most important provision would establish a rate floor for 4% tax credits and bring over, I believe, an additional $500 million in tax credit to be allocated to California. Another key provision would make bond recycling easier and expand its uses, which couldn't be more timely given the draw we have on our volume cap here in California. And Francesca and the team have also been urging our congressional delegation to sponsor the bill. And we've been able to get 25 out of the 53 Congress members on the board so far. And Melissa and Courtney have provided you with a handout of the members that have or have not signed on to the bill, as well as the bill summary. The list does not include leadership positions because they don't sponsor the legislation like this. And he wanted me to convey that any advocacy that you could do regarding this bill to members that have not yet signed it would be greatly appreciated. And if you need other assistance, feel free to contact him and he can help guide you. So that's my comments.
Pay special attention to this document Frances prepared. I know, and I give him credit, but I stole it as well. It is a very good highlight for your people to explain what's happened in terms of housing with the budget and also bills that have passed. So it's a very good document to let folks know all the activity that's going on in California in regards to housing. So kudos to Frances, and I'll let him know as well.
Great.
Don, anything else to add on that?
No, nothing else to add.
Any other comments from the members? Okay, moving on to item number 6. I believe, Kate, you're up. Showtime. Because Tim's in Hawaii.
No, he's probably over the Pacific Ocean.
Wrong glasses. They look just alike, but I can only see so much. Okay, good morning, Chair Gunning and members of the board. I'm Kate Ferguson, Director of Multifamily Programs at CalHFA. And first, I'd like to answer any questions if you have it on the proposed Resolution 1919. Do I need to do that? No.
Yeah, we'll hear the
Okay.
presentation first.
On the mixed income program first? Okay. All right. Can you go back to the agenda?
Yes, item 6,
Item 6 is the,
discussion on the 19 mixed income program.
okay. All right. Okay. Today I'm bringing you updates on the outcomes of the 2019 Mixed Income Program, or MIP, as we call it, as T has referred to it already. Additionally, I'll be updating you on the proposed deployment process for new AB 101 resources coming to CalHFA in 2020 to augment MIP. Finally, I'd like to present the primary changes to the 2019 MIP as we roll into MIP 2020. Today, we are presenting proposed revisions to the 2020 MIP for discussion. And so with that, I'd like to get started. Click. There we go. We all know that MIP was born out of a permanent source of funds provided to CalHFA by SB2. Our 2019 MIP program utilized a NOFA. The NOFA deployed a NOFA for deploying funds. We issued the NOFA in February of 2019, and the first approvals for application were made in July of 2019. Out of the 8 initial projects which were approved for funding, 1 project totaling 90 units fell out due to challenges with local municipal approvals. 6 of the remaining 7 projects included state tax credits as a source of funds, given that legislation related to AB 101, which included the new state tax credits, was in development throughout the application process. At the time AB 101 was signed into law, the industry was still expecting that these credits would be available sometime in 2019. When access to the credits was pushed to 2020, these shovel-ready projects were left with large gaps in their resources. In an effort to avoid a punitive impact to projects which had met all the conditions necessary to receive their 2019 MIP awards, I proposed the two waivers outlined in Resolution 1919, which is in your packet today. With the passage of these waivers, the 2019 MIP program will wind down, and all 1,300 units associated with these 7 projects will move towards the start of construction. As I reported at our last meeting, we solicited feedback on the 2019 MIP program from 250 stakeholders in the affordable housing development community via a survey that went out in August. We had a robust response, and overall, the primary goal related to the program itself was to simplify and streamline the process for accessing these state resources.
So do you want to, would you like us to stop and finish item 6 or before we move on into the 2020?
So they're asking, do you want to take up item 6, or did you want to take up item 6 and item 7, and listen to the changes she's proposing before you take up item 6? What's the pleasure of the
If
board?
they're intermixed, I think we should bring them up, but I defer.
Item
I think
6
it
is
makes for a more
specifically.
robust presentation if we include it.
Item 6 is related to 2019 and how
Yep.
that, and then
20, yep.
item 7 is related to the new changes for 2020.
Like, to me, they're separate items.
They are separate items, but do you want to hear and
But I think programmatically, because it's with the the MIP program, I think it's a collective presentation, and then the action items themselves are separate items.
well, there's no
But I think
action on item 7, it's just discussion.
Yes.
The resolutions on
The
item
resolutions
6.
on-
I think
yeah.
we could still hear both and act on 6.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
We'll just continue then.
Okay.
Okay. So in developing the 2020 program, as we moved through 19, feedback from the development community was not the only influencer driving our structuring of the upcoming 2020 MIP. The passage of AB 101 exponentially increased the amount of capital dedicated to mixed income development in the state. It has also exponentially increased the size of resources under the 2020 MIP as compared to 2019. Added to that, the increased number and impact of state tax credits and the specific designation of a portion of those credits to be allocated to MIP projects made the focus of the 2020 program much more targeted. These new resources are, for the first time, truly augmenting funding for units above 60% of AMI. They are specifically designed to jumpstart the development of units that will meet the needs of the missing middle, which are a newer population of need in the California housing crisis, with household incomes which range based on geography from 61 to 120% of AMI. Now that we have the context of purpose from our funding sources, I want to close the loop on the proposal I made in September at that meeting for a change of our processes with CIDLAC and TCAC. Working with our partners at CIDLAC and TCAC to get to a place where our timing and processes all line up has been a challenge. This challenge has been softened by the ready willingness of both agencies to work with CalHFA towards solutions. Initially, I envisioned a process which would allow CalHFA to be a one-stop shop for bond cap, state tax credits, and MIP funds without necessarily submitting each deal through all 3 agencies for approval. While this is not where we ended up for a variety of logistical and regulatory reasons, the collaboration and cooperation brought us to what I hope will be a more streamlined process for the development community. The first change we are making, which has been widely messaged at many conferences and at this meeting in September, is to take the MIP to an over-the-counter product. This will allow us to be more nimble in responding to the other agency calendars and timelines. As noted at the last meeting, we requested and TCAC reserved $200 million of the new $500 million in state tax credits to go to projects receiving 2020 MIP awards. Additionally, TCAC has agreed that these funds will be available in any allocation round. Combined with the cooperation of TCAC, our discussions with CIDLAC have resulted in efficiencies as well. In 2020, All MIP-related projects will compete in the mixed income pool so that they are competing with other mixed income projects for bond cap specifically set aside in that pool. To put this in context, I wanted to point out to the existing subordinate soft funding available to projects with more deeply targeted units. My example includes the programs managed by HCD, and I have eliminated those which use federal funds like CDBG, Home, and HUD's 811 program. The reason that I share this slide is to show that there really are very few sources for units above 60% of AMI. This next slide shows the same information in a pie chart form. Obviously, the biggest piece of the pie is for units at or below 60% of AMI. And what is so important, and is such a testament to HCD and the housing community, is that in actuality, the units restricted at a maximum of 60% are more likely to be at 40 and 50%, with layers of complex funding all targeted to meet the most vulnerable populations. And that's something that we can all be proud of, but it's not what the MIP program is meant to do. The 2020 MIP is not intended to compete with the programs noted before. It's to incentivize development at higher AMI levels and to serve a broader range of incomes. It's a resource to be used to try to add affordable units for households which have not historically been part of the affordable housing vernacular. The changes we propose in developing the 2020 MIP are focused on being true to the intention of AB 101. The legislation makes an express distinction between the deployment strategy for funds in year 1 versus year 2 and beyond. Year 1 is to be a stimulus year, focused on jump-starting production and providing capital to improve the feasibility of shovel-ready construction projects. The legislation calls for quick delivery of the resources by using the 4% low-income housing tax credit regs. My expectation is that in years 2 and beyond, we may see broader changes related to a variety of policy questions and conversations. So outlined in this final slide are the primary changes to MIP 2020. The draft term sheet is part of your board packet, so I won't go through all of these. In an effort to get feedback specific to the existing 2020 term sheet, we sought comments from the TCAC working group assembled by the State Treasurer's Office to work on the 2022 tax credit regulatory structure. We chose this group because it has been carefully structured by the STO to get a broad representation of stakeholders. The group includes representatives from 12 nonprofit organizations, 11 for-profit organizations, and 2 public sector representatives. Based on feedback, changes made to the term sheet that you have in your packet included a simpler per unit calculation than was originally contemplated by CalHFA, specific changes to underwriting components of the term sheet, and to our timing. One of the most controversial changes from 2019 to 2020 MIP is the elimination of funding for units below 61% AMI. While I understand and respect the contrary opinions, our focus has remained to be true to the intent of AB 101 in making this change. Additionally, a carryover requirement, which continues to get pushback, a carryover requirement from MIP 2019, which continues to get pushback, is the prohibition of using MIP with other state programs managed by HCD and targeted to units below 61% AMI. Again, I understand and respect the contrary opinions of those who disagree with this requirement, but a major component of the development of AB 101 was around concern about over-subsidizing individual projects. With the increased MIP loan amounts, which are going from a maximum of $5 million in 2019 to $18 million in 2020, combined with the new state tax credits, over-subsidization is a concern, and so this requirement for MIP 2020 remains. However, I will say that we continue to analyze and assess pairing 2020 MIP with IIG and AHSC funds, and we should have that, we wanted to have that discussion here today. That is pretty much the presentation on the transition from MIP 2019 to 2020. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Henry?
Yes. Can you refresh in my memory on a little bit more into the AB 101. So you made a comment, or at least my understanding of it, that there's a limit for the 2020 resources to be used for the households above 60% AMI. I didn't know that was, or I didn't feel that that was my understanding of the law, but can you show me where specifically in the bill that's referenced?
I don't have the bill with me, but I will tell you that AB 101, fundamentally AB 101 speaks, and I think the conversation during the legislative session was around meeting the missing middle, which is defined as incomes from 61 to 120, depending on their geographic location. And I do note that AB 101's stated purpose is to be used to finance low and moderate income housing.
That's
Can I
part of the
speak-
budget bill, but go ahead.
Can I
Jan.
speak to that? So I'm not sure it was actually AB 101 that provided the $500 million appropriation for low and moderate income housing. It was a statutory budget appropriation. And that statutory budget appropriation for $500 million that came to CalHFA, which we told you all about in September, is coming to CalHFA over a 4-year period. And that statutory budget appropriation specifically says for low and moderate income housing. And so when we brought forward to you all the allocation plan for that first $200 million of the $500 million, you all approved an allocation of $140 million to supplement the mixed income program to jumpstart production for this coming year, and $60 million for housing innovation financing, which we told you would go to potentially incentivizing construction of single family, various manufactured or mobile home or various housing type of entity, alternative home ownerships to help low to moderate income home ownership. But for that $60 million, we were setting that aside for potential pilot programs and demonstration programs. And then as things had come to us, that we would bring that back to you. But $140 million of that $200 million via the allocation plan that the board approved was to go specifically for the mixed income program.
So AB 101 does not limit then, so that was.
So to say ABO 101 limits, it was a budget appropriation that said low and moderate income housing. And during the budget discussions, it was, we would like to see some of this, we would like to see CalHFA utilize these funds to help low and moderate income, which Kate is defining as 60 to 120.
So I totally appreciate this line of conversation, because I think I heard both the AB 101 required something, and then you talked about the intent of AB 101, and so I got a little confused around that as well. I still think at the very top of our MIP policy, it still states serving units between 30% to 120% of AMI, right?
Yes.
And I guess where I share the concern about this idea of not serving units below 60% and not using HCD funds, I'm glad you're thinking about IIG and AHSC, but Dr. Bastiani, I would think you'd be concerned about why not have the ability to do 5 VHHP units within a development if we're talking about mixed income, mixed demographic communities, and I'm not sure the new state tax credit is going to provide enough subsidy to make that work, right? Particularly when you get operating assistance, right? Or if we go after the No Place Like Home. So this kind of complete prohibition against HCD being a part of it seems to me to not then continue with this idea of a mixed income community can have units serving formerly homeless people or formerly homeless veterans that do get assistance through HCD programs. And so maybe I had thoughts around the MIP dollars that would go to units between 60 and 80. I think that was 50,000, and 80 to 120 was 100,000. Maybe MIP funds, as I understand them, don't go below 60, but why not allow HCD funds to help those populations that we think integrated in our communities, integrated within a development makes a lot of sense. I think about a No Place Like Home development that we did get funding for. It has a mix of family housing units as well as housing units for those who are the No Place Like Home funded units, formerly homeless or at risk or individuals with chronic mental illness. So if we're looking at trying to create these vibrant neighborhoods, why preclude HCD? That's where I'm just really struggling.
Can I ask a clarification question? We're talking about the funding on the units being prohibited, getting both HCD subsidy and MIP subsidy. So you could have a 100-unit project that 50 of them are serving one one population that's outside the MIP world, and those units are not, the other 50 are not subsidized, and the MIP units could come in. Would that be permissive? To maybe to Preston's question,
like that condo.
Right. So you're not allowed to fund the same unit, but within the same project, you could have the funding. Would that be acceptable? You get what I'm saying? Because we don't allow double stacking of our programs on the unit either. So if you had a mixed income project, you say, hey, we want to do some at 30%. Those are funded through HCD. Some we want to be mixed income with this program, and that's the only funding within those units. Would that be permissible under what you're proposing?
Well, the way the program is structured now, no. We are looking at the IIG and AHSC, and the reason for that has been this ongoing concern of over-subsidizing projects. And we've had a lot of feedback on that specifically, and so there's concern about that. There's also concern that if we layer the MIP with all of the available programs at HCD, that there will be some true debt test issues related to that. So I think from our perspective, that this program is really intended to jumpstart development of units at 61 to 120. And so that is why the program is limited to funding for those units.
I understand that, but to Preston's point, you would jumpstart it. Otherwise, you might just see 100% at 40%. You know what I mean? Like, you may have an incentive to do mixed income units in a project if you allow just those units to get funded that aren't subsidized in another way. We see that the other way around, right? We try to do that on the ELI side. We're saying, hey, you have a straight 60% unit. If you do a couple of ELI units, you can get access to this program. And so it's just another way to look at the issue. So I think I'm just trying to get that clarification to your question, Preston.
And I
think that's what you're looking for, right?
And I know you're going to help clarify my thinking. You always do, help me think through things. I get the idea of project versus unit, and I'm glad you brought that up. So I think I guess it's the prohibition within a MIP project of HCD funds, or is it a prohibition of a MIP unit of HCD?
Project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the issue that I would need understanding.
Yeah, Jonathan, hang on, Delilah was, yeah, go ahead.
So just to kind of, I guess remind the board about the policy discussion that we had. And, it's always difficult to talk about policy without jumping into talking about a transaction, right? And backing into a policy based on transactional elements like targeting and, the specifics about how to subsidy layer an affordable unit. If we could stay on the policy discussion for a moment, and, the creation of the MIP program back in 2018, when we first started talking about it, was really in the context of redevelopment having gone away, and the naturally occurring development activities within cities that was fueled by redevelopment, that oftentimes did allow for the creation of moderate income housing in many communities, right, within the 80% to 120% arena. And when that dropped off, when that the ability to fund redevelopment projects in communities stopped, there became a real gap associated with assisting low to moderate income households to stay in neighborhoods where they have jobs and where they go to school and where they live, right? And so we saw a very clear commitment and a very clear and dedicated policy-driven alignment of financing to address homelessness, in the subsequent years after redevelopment fell away, right? And so I think that we have, in the marketplace, you saw in that, in our sheet that we got from Francois, that it really is about $1 billion worth of funding that supports 60% AMI and below units, right? Especially homeless units. So when we started creating this program, back in 2018, in the fall, we really talked about the missing middle. And as a board, we really felt that, the pilot program of $40 million for a program that would help fuel low to moderate income units without a lot of other subsidy playing into that was the right policy direction that we could go. That someone like CalHFA, an entity like CalHFA, who had perhaps more nimbleness and less, kind of regulatory barriers, could actually be a little bit more proactive in terms of funding these types of projects. So really, that was the nexus, and that was the connection between redevelopment going away, a real concentration on focusing our public subsidy into homelessness, and then us being able to identify that there was a need. So the 2019 program, I think, really was a pilot program to see if it would work or not. And so I have questions around the 2019 recommendations that you're making to modify the program itself and how we implement it for the 7 projects. But I think the policy discussion that the board, I would like to have the board, talk about is, let's remember that that's where the outgrowth of this came, from the idea of 2018 through 2019 of how do we identify keeping our neighborhoods integrated, keeping people who are, of higher incomes still participating and working next to folks that, are not as, that don't have as many resources. So I don't want to deviate from that by talking about transactionally how to make a project work and how to finance that project. I'd like to stay on the policy discussion around, is mixed income the right way to go? Is addressing the needs of 60% or higher households an important goal? And then let's talk about transactionally how that actually happens and let the staff tell us how they believe that happens. And the reality of combining our financing and HCD's financing, it's not so much that we don't want HCD money on our projects, right? That's what I heard us saying. But it's really that the HCD programs aren't set up to maximize and to provide, awards to projects that are mixed income, right? You get the most points, you get the most subsidy, you get the better ranking if you do deeper housing, deeper affordability on an HCD project. So that's how you get VHHP, that's how you get MHP, that's how you get MHP. The IIG program and the TOD program used to have moderate income in their guidelines when it was first developed 7 years ago, however long ago that was. Now it's all deep affordability. So it's not that we reject HCD, it's that we don't compete well within the HCD guidelines. And why create the bureaucratic and delays associated with trying to compete with, other organizations that are doing 100% housing for homeless individuals or individuals living in homelessness, and delay the project, right? Delay shovel-ready projects. So I think it's more about us not trying to reject HCD financing, but us not being able to meet the formula that HCD has set up for itself and for its product.
Thank you, Delaware. Jonathan?
Yeah, so I will stay on the policy level of the conversation and say that the issue is funding projects rather than funding units. I'm all for funding units that are affordable at 60 to 120%. But if we say the whole project has to be that, then we're discriminating against people with mental health issues. We're discriminating against people who are homeless. And specifically, the No Place Like Home guidelines insist that you can't have more than 49% NPLH units in a project. So, and the reason for that is that what we're trying to achieve overall is integration of populations and communities. And to say that it's normative for people with mental health issues to live in a middle-class neighborhood, it's normative. But if we look at the funding as being project-based, we're going to exclude people with special needs. And that, I totally get not using this money to subsidize already heavily subsidized units. What I don't get is making this a project-based rather than a unit-based, because if it's project-based, then indeed what we're going to get are projects that discriminate against people with mental health issues.
So John, would it be,
Okay, so in a mixed income program, the equity is coming in to help the 60% AMI and below. We value the equity of the state tax credit at about $140,000 a unit. If someone's coming in and they need MHP and a state tax credit, that's almost $200,000 a unit in subsidy. And so we're not trying to put subsidy on top of subsidy. And when we went out and talked to developers responded back to us that they were not likely to see state tax credits and MHP, that it was likely going to be one or the other. In addition, when we set this program up, we did think specifically about working with local governments who had specifically money set aside and got money specifically for Triple H money for homeless, permanent supportive housing, whatever bond measures at a local level that they were bringing to the table for deeply targeted affordable, we are not precluding any of those dollars. So the idea was MHP working with a state tax credit seems like a lot of subsidy. And as Delilah has said, that program does not work well with a mixed income development. However, IIG and the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program and potentially No Place Like Home that is administered at a local level, those to me seem like those would be funding that could work together with a project. But what we have are two separate programs with MHP and the mixed income program that just don't align well. And so I think to say, when we said HCD funding, I think we want to be able to look at it on a case-by-case basis to see if there's program funding within HCD that can align well with the mixed income program, and we will continue to have those conversations.
I would like.
Do you want to follow up?
well, I just wanted to say that I did appreciate, John, your Jonathan's comments around, creating the opportunity to have a mix of incomes within the project. I think that is, the right policy direction that we need to go. My concern is the shovel-ready nature of the projects that we have and the projects that we're anticipating having in 2020, right? Programmatically, where we wanted to be was to be able to be in construction with developments in 2020, so that our pilot program from 2019 actually produced units. And however we treat that program and however we modify or not modify our requirements under 2019, that should always be kept in mind, because if we're about to be, if we can start construction on 1,300 units of housing under this pilot program that we adopted, in mid-2019, that's the right policy goal, right? We want to be able to be in production, house people quicker. If we want to modify and create the integration that you're talking about, Jonathan, in the 2020 program, my only concern would be, how could we set aside funding at the HCD level so that it prioritizes projects like the mixed income project that we're trying to achieve, so that we're not having to compare apples to oranges as we compete for limited resources at MHP, right? And so if our policy objective is to integrate communities and provide housing opportunities for folks with mental health issues or folks experiencing homelessness, great, let's do that. But as a policy objective, can we appeal to HCD or to the governor about setting aside money that we don't have to compete for specifically against someone who is housing funding 100%?
Just a reminder, voters approved the funds in a certain way for most of our programs, so I would caution against changing changing the terms with set-asides for certain things. I think it's just general statement, we have more programs than just MHP. So to say across the board HCD programs, we have a dozen production programs. And so I hear that there wants to be a little more nimbleness, but I would caution against anything that just generally put the prohibition, because we don't know what programs will be coming. There's always modifications to our programs and our program guidelines. We do the same thing. We do not want to see oversubsidy on a unit level, but we have seen, just to put it out there, especially in undersubscribed programs, folks come for those programs and have a real mixed income and serving folks at above 6% of AMI, and we're only funding the units, obviously, that maybe are just set aside for veterans or something like that. So I think part of this is an optionality for, it's an optionality situation for developers, right? No one's saying that you have to come out for HCD funds, but to those entities that may desire it, you would allow optionality if you didn't have this like project prohibition. And so you may not choose that because of what might be perceived as like the requirements that may be, or the complementary nature of things. But I think that's the challenge there is we would be maybe removing that optionality. You know, maybe that's the policy choice. And then we would likely just see, 60 to 120, 100% developments within this. And if that's the policy outcome we desire, that's just what we should consider.
Lynn, go ahead.
I guess, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in some way it feels like we're trying to solve a problem that maybe we already have a correction in place for, and that's in terms of over-subsidization. And my understanding is when a project goes through the different application processes, one of the things that we look at through that application is if there's any subsidization that's already occurred at an earlier stage in the process. And then that's part of the consideration on whether or not to award dollars at each given level. And so I'm wondering, is there some way to look at those controls and see if we have sufficient control to prevent over-subsidization so that we don't have to try to kind of outline?
That's not the only reason, Lynn, that we will continue to look at programs that can align. We will do so.
Right. But I guess the question around over-subsidization, is that a true problem, or is that something that we already have?
We do have things that are aligned to that we can look to ensure as we're underwriting that there isn't over-subsidization. Yes.
So just, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
To Mr. Hunter's comments and to this concept, and back to Tia's original comments about looking for subsidy for those lower income units from the localities, from the cities, the states, and partnership at that level versus going to the HCD programs. We are not precluding those units. We are allowing income averaging, and I think we'll see that become a big piece of the application. So I just wanted to state that it's not a preclusion of those units. It's just that this program is not structured to fund those units.
Yeah, so just a couple other things. One is, I have no problem with making shovel readiness a primary criteria. I get the need for speed and development. But what I do have a problem with is even excluding the possibility of some brilliant developer out there coming with a shovel-ready project that allows for true integration of populations. And then the second thing is I would have a question is, so how do you look at county no place like home funding? So there are certain counties that receive categorical allocations of no place like home money, which in effect becomes local money. Could that money, is that still considered HCD money, or is it local money?
I wouldn't consider that necessarily HCD money, because just like the special needs housing program and MHSA before that, we didn't consider that CalHFA money. We considered that local money. And so wouldn't preclude that. We would need to look at the particular program of No Place Like Home to make sure that it's aligning. But as I sit here now, that wouldn't be funds that we would normally say couldn't come in. I think what we have to do is ensure program alignment. And so that's what we're looking at. And so the main HCD program that deals with subordinate debt financing as a program is the multifamily housing program, which has been around for 20 years. It is targeted at 60% AMI and below and it is not supportive of mixed income developments. That's not the way the program is set up. And so that program does not align well at all with the mixed income program. But other programs, we are more than open to continue to have those conversations and to look through those things, because it's not just, it is program and operationally do they work together. And so we are absolutely willing to continue to have those conversations.
Mr. Russell, I think you had a comment.
Mine was actually a procedural question. As we've gone into this discussion, it seems increasingly confusing that we have both 6 and 7 up. I mean, is there an advocate or applicant in the case of 6?
Yes.
And are there speakers on either of these items that would like to know when their opportunity to speak is? And so I'd like to see if we can separate these out to make those lines more clear.
Yeah, I think our action item occurs for number 6. There's 2 resolutions that have to be approved on that. So, Anna Marie, do you have something to add to that?
I just wanted, I mean, it's just more of a statement, because we keep talking about shovel-ready applications, but all the HDC applications that are considering funding are considered shovel-ready. So I just want to get that clarified. It keeps coming up, but I just want to make sure, isn't that the assumption that if you're planning to apply, your project is shovel-ready?
I think the funding for HCD comes in at the permanent side and not at construction. So, sorry. So I think most of HD funding is a back-end permanent subsidy and not a construction subsidy upfront in terms of construction loans. So the money that we're talking about here is actually going to build construction and start construction on a project, as opposed to more of the permanent subsidy on the back end that comes in to take out the financing, where you have about 2 or 3 years where you can get the rest of your financing in place to then qualify for that money.
Any application going through is exactly what you just said. You wouldn't be putting in if you weren't at that process.
So what I hear you saying
Readiness is our highest scored
Is
Right.
your score,
aspect in all of our programs.
So what I hear you saying is it the assumption that anything that would come to the MIP program for consideration would already have received funding through a previous NOFA from HCD?
Yeah, so I think that for me is that's the timing issue, right? That becomes the timing issue, where we then become last money in, as opposed to first money in, and catalytic to being able to do construction on a project and to be able to move a project forward. I think that for me, when you start layering several sources of financing on a project, it just automatically, by the nature of the funding cycles that are competitive and are, within a cycle, but a long cycle, it just increases the development time on a project. And I know that when we talked about this earlier on, the pilot program in 2019 was really made for that, being able to do something quickly, do something more nimbly, get projects built. Now, we can have a separate conversation about what that means for the federal credits, for the state tax credit program. And there's a reason that the $500 million is really spread out over 4 years. It's not all being used for this program in year 1. So, what we decide today may be something that, changes, once we see 2 cycles of funding go forward.
All right, before we get back to item the number 6 in the resolution, I think Jovan had one comment, and I see one more over
I just had a follow-up to that same thread. Yeah,
there.
go ahead.
Jovan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add to that, with my relatively new arrival to the housing space and having spent the majority of my time doing health and education policy, I think it would be extremely helpful, because I feel like it's sort of deja vu. It's like Groundhog Day with a lot of these conversations. We're having them here, we're having them at the TCAC board, CIDLAC board. And I think I appreciate and want to associate my comments with the statements Delilah made. I think it's very helpful to sort of ground us in terms of where we've been, how we got here, and why we're doing this. Because at the end of the day, no one program is going to solve this problem. I think there has to be an acknowledgement that we are in a crisis, because I think we've been trying to do too much and solve every problem, so much that we've crippled and sort of made so rigid what we're trying to do. And so I just think sort of grounding all of us in terms of what are we here for, what are we trying to do with this program, and not trying to think about all the things around the corner, I think would be extremely helpful, at least for me.
Great comments, thank you. With that, Kate, why don't you summarize what you're asking for in the resolution, then I would entertain comments from the public only regarding item number 6. So, Kate, if you go ahead.
Yes, sir. The resolution speaks to the position that our 7 projects, 6 of the 7 2019 MIP award projects found themselves in when the state tax credits, the access to state tax credits were postponed to 2020. The 2019 MIP program required that, because we're so focused on shovel-ready and on getting these deals out for construction, it required that they receive a SIDLAC allocation in 2019. The 2020 tax credits, state tax credits, now need a 2020 allocation. So ultimately what ended up happening there is we had 6 projects with a huge gap in sources that they had anticipated would be funded from the state tax credits. These are projects that are ready to go and will be out of the ground because they have to be based on their allocation of MIP by June 30th of 2020. So we had a lot of conversations about this. All of these developers just sort of were stopped in their tracks when the state credits were postponed to 2020. One of the developers went ahead, and we anticipate that they will receive bond cap for 2 projects in December. And what they've requested is an increase to their MIP allocation so that they don't have to turn that in and go for the state tax credits in 2020. And we think that that actually is a reasonable request and something that we would like to support so we can get these units out of the ground. The other 4 actually have not received bond cap in 2019 because they view the state tax credits as such an important piece of their capital stack. So they are going to 2020, to the first round of 2020. Their applications have already been submitted. It was a joint application to SIDLAC and TCAC submitted on November 15th, and those will be allocated by TCAC in January and SIDLAC in February, according to the current calendar. So what we would like to do is allow those 4 projects, even though their allocation won't come till 2020, to still take their 2019 MIP awards and go through the construction process. And we'd like to allocate additional funds to the 2 projects that will receive a 2019 allocation, because that's what they pursued based on their award, and they did not step back from that, even knowing that they would have this gap from the state credits. We'd like to increase their MIP award from 2019. So it's really the timing of the state tax credits. They all contemplated, because the state tax credits were part of the legislative process and they all knew they were coming. I think the industry thought that those would be available generally in 2019, and that's what sort of created this odd timing issue. So that's what we've requested in Resolution 1919.
Great, thank you, Kate. Before we hear from the members of the audience for item number 6, remember, limit your comments to 3 minutes. So we certainly want to hear from everyone. I think the first person up on item number 6 is Tiffany Fan. Tiffany, are you in the audience? All right. This one says CalHFA 20, Jeff Brown. Is there anyone who does want to speak
On item 6?
Let's do it that way.
I have a clarifying question.
Yes, please.
I read that the increasing the loans, the $3 to $5 million gaps want to increase the loan amount. So is that the maximum then 8 to 10?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions on item number 6,
Go ahead.
if I can ask. So I really see these as 2 separate activities, and I just want to be clear about my interpretation, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So for the Valencia, Hayward Mission, Antioch, and Family and Twin Oaks, what we're saying is that Staff has already proceeded to approve the submittal of a November joint application between CIDLAC and TCAC.
We have. And the reason we did that was the developers have determined that the state tax credits are such a critical piece of their capital stack that these projects can in no way go forward without them. So what that would mean if we don't approve this today is that they would give back their MIP award from 2019 because they did not receive an allocation from CIDLAC in 2019 as is required under the MIP program.
Right, so the MID program, under its general timeline, just basically said that the application to CIDLAC would be due for the December meeting or earlier.
It said that, yes, they had to have an allocation by the end of 2019.
Or a 2019 allocation.
Yes, a
of bonds.
2019 CIDLAC allocation.
Right, but those four, is it 4 projects or 5
Yes.
projects? 4 projects. Those 4 projects have submitted an application in November.
For
to CIDLAC
2020 allocation.
Have submitted an application in November of 2019.
Yes, ma'am.
The award won't be until January of 2020, and with that, that will trigger the allocation
Their
of state
application
tax
is for
credits.
2020 funds.
Right, but it'll trigger our 2020 allocation of state credits to them. They have not applied for state credits yet through our program. They would just automatically.
That's what we're asking them to do. The program said they had to come in for 2019 allocation. To get a state tax credit, you have to have 2020 allocation. And so what we're asking the board is to allow these MIP projects that didn't get 2019 to change the program rules to allow them to go after 2020 with state tax credits.
Right, and to forward commit our MIP 2020 allocation, or to keep their 2019 allocation and carry that over
Yes.
to 2020.
Yes,
And
that's
how
number
many
1.
units do those 4 projects represent?
I don't have that off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
And how much combined MIP subsidy do those 4 projects represent?
Right now, the cap is 5 million.
So
I
each
believe-
of them are getting the $5 million cap?
I believe that one of them is at 3 million.
Okay, so maybe if you can have staff answer the question about how many units that creates, maybe
Is
someone
this
on your.
included in the 1,300
Yes,
units?
it's included in the 1,300
So
units.
the 7 projects would have equaled 1,300 units, and these
The
are.
staff report says 8 projects equal 1,300 units, 1 project dropped off, leaving 7, 4 of which are these. So
Yes.
that's what I'm trying to understand.
How many of
units-
these represent that 1,300? Does staff understand that question? Okay.
The second question, and I'm sorry to be so prescriptive on this, on the board level, we want to give staff the benefit of the doubt, but this has a policy implication around how we allocate our resources, so that's why I'm kind of asking more detailed transactional questions on this. Item number 2, where we're asking that we exceed the $5 million cap by $3 million on the Glen Loma Ranch project and $5 million on the Village at Burlingame project. I think the same question, how many units does that represent on these projects? And then has the developer attempted to meet that gap, either utilizing a deferred developer fee or contributed their own equity to this project to make that work? Have they sought other funds from the locality to make this gap up? And the 2 other questions beyond that is when would these be ready to go and start construction? And secondly, where are they in terms of the affordability and the average affordability for those 2 particular projects? Because if we're increasing subsidy so significantly, I just want to understand what the average affordability is for those 2 projects. And again, apologies for that micro question.
Hang on one sec, Preston. Can you answer that, Kate?
We're going to find out.
All right.
Can I go back to
I
then?
have all the detail, I
got it.
just don't have
I
it
got it. I
here,
thought
so.
you had it right.
Can I go back to the first question and your kind of response to that, Tia, which is, so it sounds like we are modifying the program of what we approved. And I get the impact is that if we don't, that they turn their MIP award back in, but then that would carry forward and they could apply again. So why not go that route?
It was a timing issue and kind of a bureaucratic, why do that issue
Because the state tax credits weren't part of the consideration in 2019. So to say that they are really required to make their project work, they weren't 2019, they weren't available as anticipated that it was going to be using the 4%.
I think that's part of the challenge, right? Because the state tax credits, there was an assumption that, once there was direction from the legislature to allocate the $500 million to this program, there was an anticipation that that was going to happen. Because people have been talking about this
since January.
Right?
They've been talking about it since January.
For a long time. So I think it was an anticipation that these credits would be available. The fact that they weren't available because regulations weren't written, because, we didn't have all the various bureaucratic challenges associated with making these funds available is really not the fault of the development community. It's really kind of our ability to be nimbly responsive to that.
And that's what we're trying to do. We went back and forth with this over a number of times.
Right.
Should they turn in their MIP? Should they give back their MIP? How do we align it with TCAC and their timing? And there's plenty. We have $140 million of MIP. Soon to be $180 million of MIP. Everyone that applied in round one and met the minimum threshold was funded. So there isn't like we didn't fund somebody that's not going to be funded. And so does it really make sense from an operational standpoint to have somebody turn something back in so they can reapply and go back after? Or does it make sense just to come and say, our timing was off? While we were getting these applications, receiving these applications, and underwriting these applications, legislation was moving coterminously to that time. And so this is our way to try to bring together the pieces from a timing perspective.
I think you said building the airplane while we're flying it. Lynn, go ahead.
Just a clarifying question about the change to the program. Would this be, is it envisioned that this is a one-time change that impacts just the 2019?
Yes.
Or is this something that carries
Yes,
forward?
and then we can have a discussion in item 7 about the 2020. Yes, so this is like a one-time for applicable to those projects that came in 2019.
And I will say, I know there was a question, there have been a variety of questions. The first 4 projects which are going to, which have been submitted to CIDLAC and TCAC for January and February allocations, total approximately 750 units. The other 2 projects would make up the rest. The total units is 1,296 of the units that remain. So I would say that.
Start construction? When are they going to start?
I'm sorry. I would say that they will still be subject to the requirement of the 2019 MIP program that requires them to be out of the ground in construction by June of this year, of 2020. And additionally, I would say that to the extent that we've done a review of their costs, we have spent months with these developers doing what Tia has instructed them to, sharpen their pencils, and several times. And I do think that we have been through these, there's significant deferred developer fee up to amounts that are feasible for the projects. They've leveraged every other resource I think they could. And I just think that to the extent that we can accommodate these, we ensure that these shovel-ready projects get out of the ground without having to go all the way through the process again, which I would expect would, if we say that time is the greatest cost in the development community today, requiring them to go back through the process would be at least a 90-day delay. And I would hate to see that happen.
Gail, I think you had a comment?
I do just a quick comment, Mr. Chair. I don't. There we go. Just in terms of the coterminous budget process and planning, with my finance hat on, I would hate for anyone to think that until the budget is passed and the law, we're actually going to act on that, because right, I mean, so I absolutely get the point and the question of timing, but so that's sort of my one comment, just to be mindful that until the budget is signed, it's not a final document. So I would hate for anyone to think that there's this coterminous planning ability, because I think that could actually further complicate what is already an incredibly complicated part of developing in California. And then my second comment is, would this same privilege of kind of reopening parts of 2019 be available to all developers? Is that the intent, or it's just a matter of these 4 developments?
These 4 developments need the state tax credits and have decided to go that route and give the MIP money back if we require that. 2 additional projects have already received, are expected to have submitted for bond cap and are expected to receive it in December. Those 2 projects have requested increases to their MIP amount to offset the state tax credits that they are foregoing because they went with the 2019 requirement of the MIP program. We have 1 project which didn't contemplate the state tax credits, and that is closing, and it's 240 units, and it should be closed by the end of this month. So that's the total of the 7 projects.
So let me make sure I get to Gail's question. Everyone that applied for 2019 and was awarded, we're treating them all the same.
Yes.
So no one is getting, who applied, met minimum threshold, is getting any kind of unfair advantage over anyone else. So 2019 opened because everyone that applied basically and met threshold was funded. There wasn't anyone that's going to be disadvantaged by this action.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Sorry.
And just, if you can answer the question about average affordability for the 2 projects.
I'd be happy to.
So the last 2 projects, which are Glen Loma and Village at Burlingame, are requesting a total MIP subsidy of $18 million, but they're producing 546 units. So that's a really great per subsidy contribution.
The last 2 are producing 287 units.
Oh, 287.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we have 1 project that didn't contemplate state credits, which had 240 units.
Okay.
So I'm looking for that. I'm going to say they were both, the average for both of them was in the 60s. I don't have in this spreadsheet the exact average, but that I will say that the span of affordability for all of these projects was 30 to 120. Most of the MIP units that we got were at 80 to 120. Most of them were at 81, which is why we're trying to incent them to go to higher levels versus just meet the minimum. Okay. So I believe that the 2 that are asking for additional MIP they're certainly in that range, and I believe that they're in the mid 60s for general average affordability for those 2 projects.
Can I add to that the MIP subordinate loan, what's the repayment terms on the subordinate loan? It's not 55-year deferred loan, is it?
Under 2019, it's a 55-year loan. Under the 2020 proposal, it's a 17-year with a 30-year amortization.
Okay.
55-year regulatory agreements on both.
Okay.
All right.
That's right.
I just have to say, I do not recall that state tax credits were part of the contemplation. And so I think that those applicants are actually going to be cutting into the state allocation. So there is maybe not a preferential treatment happening, but it is like a little bit of a cut into the tax credit, the state tax credits they're being competed for by a bunch of other people, and it feels like it's giving them a little bit of an advantage there. But that's I just have a different memory of last year or this year then.
So the $200 million in which is reserved for CalHFA is not competitive, it's over the counter.
Okay.
And so this isn't affecting the $300 million in state tax credits, and it won't be cutting into those $300 million.
But it's taking project, well, okay, fine. It doesn't add up in my head, but that's all right.
You're saying it's taking authority from 2020's state credit allocation.
Right.
It would be something if that if they came back in 2020 and went through the MIP program, and they would actually be eligible probably for more mixed income money. It would be a different program, but I think to our efforts to ensure that shovel-ready projects get out of the ground, it just, it's been a conundrum of timing issues for these projects. And right or wrong, I think that the development industry did count the state tax credits when they saw them going through the legislative process, and they saw that process culminating in the summer months. They contemplated accessing those in 2019.
There's additional discussion, or is there a motion to approve Resolution 1919?
So moved.
Moves, there a second? So motion and second. Roll call, please, Melissa.
Ms. Davila Frias?
No.
Ms. Gallagher?
Yes.
Ms. Gunn? I'm sorry, excuse me, Secretary Ambassiani, I apologize.
Yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Agee?
Yes.
Mr. Olmsted?
Yes.
Ms. Von Koch-Liebert?
Yes.
Mr. Prince?
No.
Mr. Russell?
No.
Ms. Sotelo?
Yes.
And Resolution 19-19 is approved.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we move on,
Yes.
my request may be to help a little bit more with the efficiency of the meeting in terms of all the back and forth with the board members. I think there were questions that were kind of more pertaining to the profile of the project, which I think are very helpful to understanding. Maybe if we can get just a little bit more information on those, I think that will be helpful in terms of making a decision.
Okay.
So I think what would have been helpful is if the actual staff reports for these projects had probably been updated and modified. I think that was.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Right.
that's exactly, and that is our mistake, because we were looking at it all
Yeah.
together, and I think that would have helped everyone, and they could have understood the different,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think there were some questions that came that were really helpful to thinking about the project and the
Yeah.
nuances and the financing of it. And then there
Yes.
were others, I think, that had to do with other sort of subjective things.
That would have been a
correct?
better approach, to bring the actual staff reports approving the
Correct.
projects with what we were asking for to be changed. So noted. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
board members.
Great. Item 7, Kate, I think, discussion, is there any additional
Well, I think
discussion? Or do
we
want
did the
to-
presentation, and now it's board discussion and audience discussion.
Good question. I heard a couple different things in the earlier part of the discussion, and I appreciate the idea of reducing kind of too many cooks in the kitchen for some of these projects, where we talk a lot about how, all these different entities monitoring the same project, and there's a lot of redundancy and inefficiency in the way we're subsidizing housing, so I appreciate that idea. I also appreciate, Jonathan's point on, are we being too proscriptive and sort of saying, you have to do it this way, and we're not gonna allow for you to be creative in some other way? And so my question is really, what is the consequence of being less prescriptive and allowing, you can do just this, and let the market kind of come in and do just the 60 to 120 and let it roll on the project, or coming in and saying, I'm gonna do this 60 to 120 in these 100 units, and then I'm gonna have 5 or 10 other units with a different source that are being kind of funded distinctly. Is there a consequence in the scoring or the process that tips that balance?
Well, first of all, one of the options for financing is income averaging, so we don't preclude that. Okay. I think what Tia's saying and what I'm saying is that the funding for those lower AMI level units would come from more jurisdictional, more local sources than going through the HCD state sources.
So it's at the state level trying to create discrete sort of funding streams that are not.
I think what we're really trying to do too is, we don't believe we should have state subsidy on top of state subsidy. If we're talking about maximizing public benefit, the state tax credit is coming in as that equity state subsidy. And so, like we said, we will be and we're trying to give that maximum flexibility for the market to dictate how their project looks. We're trying to say, we have the ability to do income averaging. We have this new state resource that'll help you with those lower income units. You, market, come tell us, based on this kind of structure, how that development looks, and we're hoping to see a range of incomes that range from 30 to 120, given all of these new tools that you have. And so I'm really excited to see what we're going to get, because this is an alternative way of thinking. This is an alternative way of trying to say, we want to work with the markets and the way the markets work to utilize a new federal tool to do income averaging. Because if you look right now at 4% tax credits, for the first 4 months of 2019, we're still averaging 50% AMI and below. So what do our developments look like when you give them the optionality to have a broader range? Do you need less operating subsidy? Do you need less rental subsidy? Do you need less subsidy altogether? And so that's the model that we're looking at.
And in some instances, we have no choice. And I think that that's a big part of these conversations that sometimes we overlook, is how much the market actually dictates what we're doing, and how so much of what we're thinking about, even the value of a tax credit, is based on a snapshot in time that may not become a reality come 2, 3, 4, 5 months from now, when you're quintupling the infusion of tax credits into a market.
And putting all kinds of
Correct.
other subsidy out there at
Correct.
the same time.
Correct.
I think, yeah, what I'd like to do is have folks come up and comment, and that'll, I think, inform the board's discussion. So I'm going to lead off with Alice Talcott. I'd like you to come up.
Good morning.
Please remember, limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Good morning. I'm Alice Talcott with Mid-Penn Housing. And thank you so much for this discussion. At Mid-Penn, we've been concerned about the missing middle. We've been working on projects that have that are serving that population. So I really wanted to give you some feedback based on our perspective and based on our learning on this, which has really been trying to figure this out and how it works. I wanted to start by one of the things in the term sheet that concerned me was a regulatory requirement saying that to be eligible, you needed to have 10% of your projects at an average of 100% of AMI. Or if the market study didn't support that, then it would be at an average of 70% AMI. And I think one of the things we've just really seen is a huge increase in AMIs in the Inner Bay Area, but throughout California on the coastal areas. And so what's happened is, when we're talking about serving the missing middle, what we've really figured out or discovered is that what we thought it was 3 years ago is very different than what it is today. And so, for example, San Mateo County, where we're looking at these projects, 100% AMI for a 4-person household in 2016 was $123,000. It's gone up 30% since then. It's now at $161,000. A 2-bedroom rent under that 219 AMI level is $3,626. So that same household really in 2016 that we were thinking of serving at 100% AMI, if they've gotten 3% increases, instead of this 30% bump in AMI, they're at, they're more like an 80% AMI household now. So as we're talking about serving this population, we really have to keep this in mind. And the calculations can already be done for 2020 and 2021, and they're going to go up another probably 14% in those 2 years. So I think this is really important, and what we really don't want your program to do is to, I think setting this 100% average AMI is just too high. It's too close to market. Your underwriting guidelines say you need to be 7% below market. That's just way too close. What we're seeing is that the types of units that we would be producing, who's going to be in these moderate income households, they're competing with, who are we competing with? They're really not doing it against, a new market rate project that has a lot of amenities that ours don't. We really have to be well below that, partly because as a restricted project, we're going to have a lot more paperwork, a lot more requirements to get into the project. So we really think 15% below market is a much more prudent underwriting ask. So I just want to make sure, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the term sheet, but in order to qualify for this, we don't want to be pushed in these high AMI areas to have to be serving that high of an income. It just doesn't make sense, and I don't think it's where the need is either. I also wanted to say that in terms of this idea about the subsidy amounts, we are concerned that the subsidy levels are too low. I think if, to the extent that we can pair these with the state income credits, it makes a big difference in what that total subsidy is. But you just approved 69 million of the state credits of the 200 million to those 2019 projects. The list came out last night. I looked at it. It totals 69 million. So there's 130 million left. I don't know how well that's going to pair with your 140 million of the MIP money, that's going to be enough to subsidize those projects appropriately. So I really think you need to look at, if you aren't going to have enough state credits available for that MIP amount, that you increase the limits by either, certainly we think that allowing HCD sources on those is important, particularly IIG or No Place Like Home, which I think do pair well. Or you're going to have to increase the limits to fund the units below 60% AMI. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alice. Again, remember, limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mike Kelly. Is Mike Kelly in the audience? Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Kelly. I'm with West Development Ventures. Thank you for your time today. I'll be brief to be respectful of your time. I know there's a good number of speakers behind me. I'd like to thank staff for all their efforts in producing a proposal for you to contemplate that, in our view, is consistent with the legislature's intent with respect to the income averaging and the higher level of income targeting. I'd also like to say that this program, if approved in its current form, in our view, would be one of, if not the only program that would target the missing middle. And unlike HCDs, IAG, MHP, et cetera. So that was mentioned before, but I think it's important to have a program that really is a focus for the missing middle. The other thing I'd say is that I know there's a lot of discussion about deeper targeting of going below the 61%, and we would support a 50% base, nothing below that. Primary reason is we'd like to increase the higher income targeting to have the ability to produce the units and get production out there that's needed, and having the higher income bandwidth and the debt that it's going to produce really is going to make that a possibility. There was also some discussion earlier on subsidy layering, and just one thing to pay attention to is every time you layer additional subsidy, it's going to cost something. All those layers cost something, whether it's operational cost or carrying costs, et cetera. So just something to pay attention to. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and appreciate your favorable consideration of this worthwhile matter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next up, Sam Arco with High Ridge Costa.
How's it going? Sorry, I just want to get a good mic distance. I'm Sam Arico with High Ridge Costa. We're an affordable housing developer. I just wanted to take the time to thank CalHFA staff for being so accommodating during out this MIP process. It's been very challenging with the SIDLAC TCAC reg, so thank you guys again. I want to show support for the direction that the MIP project is moving towards. We support targeting a higher AMI. I want to point out something. Our understanding of the IRC Section 42, Section I, only lets you AMI target at 10% increments. So only subsidizing units at 61 will preclude you from providing anything in the 60% range if you're doing the AMI targeting. Other than that, we support almost everything, and we again accommodate and thank you for being so accommodating for staff. Thank you so much.
Hey, go ahead.
So instead of 61, how would you change that?
We would just like to support targeting at 60 and above.
Okay.
Just so if you do 61 up, you're going to have to do 70s and 80s only, which means you're going to be providing units at 30 or 40% to offset it.
Right.
So
okay.
That's our only comment.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Mr. Brown, Jeff Brown.
My name's Jeff Brown. I'm president of USA Properties Fund. We've been developing affordable housing here in California for 30 years. We have 11,000 unit portfolio statewide. Want to thank the board for letting me speak today. I totally support the recommendations that are being put forth here. I think ironically, I mean, this is a good thing. I don't know that this is the intent. I think it is, but I think 40 and 50% units are going to be supported here, because in order to use this subsidy, and I agree with the previous speaker, starting at 60% versus 61 is good function practically, but because we have income averaging, you're going to want to put units at 40 and 50%, and along with the state credits. So I'm not in support of layering other programs, because what that does is it's going to, and the one word I haven't heard in this whole meeting is the word cost. It's going to discourage people to be more cost effective, and we all agree on one thing. We have scarce government resources, and we want to get as much affordable housing as can be done. And this 60, 120%, you know, a third of all people in California pay half their costs for housing. That doesn't stop at 60% of median income. That's all the way up the ladder. So it's very important that we have a program really dedicated to this, and I really do think it'll help the production. And I want to just add, we turn away a lot of residents in our communities that are over income that want to live in our communities that would pay more rent. Couple of just housekeeping kind of issues. I think it's important on the tax credit projects that in terms of the structure of the CalHFA money, you know, you get developer fee basis on your tax credit deals. It's important in that the loan gets structured in a way that allows the developer to get their deferred developer fee paid off, because that's a tax basis issue. So that'd be my first comment. Also, and CalHFA can appreciate that as a lender on many projects, making sure the subordinate subsidy agree with the first TD lender. And our experience is on whatever subordinate loans that we use on our projects, a lot of times the first TD lender likes a 1 or 2 year maturity to go out further just to make them comfortable. But that's something you can clean up. And just the last thing I want to say, I really think what you're doing here was, at least from my vantage point, was the intent of what the legislature was trying to accomplish. So I applaud your efforts of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Tiffany Fan.
Apologies for the mix-up earlier on the item number. So Tiffany Fan on behalf of Bridge Housing. We did submit some written comments to CalHFA staff and thank them for their time clarifying some items for us. We align most of our concerns with those expressed by CHPC, which you will hear from later. But just to highlight two quick items, we did have the concerns about prohibiting HCD funds for units 30 to 60. We also had some concerns around the 180-day construction start deadline. Just wanted some clarity on that due to financing coming in at different times. So we'll work on that, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Katie Lamont.
Thank you. My name is Katie Lamont. I'm the Senior Director of Housing Development with TNDC, Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. And while we're known primarily for our work in supportive housing, we do also sometimes partner with other groups to do mixed income developments. Well, we have partnered most recently with Related and Tishman Speyer. And we are a member of the Affordable Housing Community of San Francisco, and the city of San Francisco has been actively looking to make middle income projects feasible within its city. And there are several communities and specific projects, one of which TNDC is a part of, where the specific mixed income of both low income and middle income was really a priority and was necessary to secure neighborhood and political support. So we're very grateful to the governor and the state and all of your board and also the employees for figuring out envisioning this program and figuring out how to implement it so that it will really work. So we are grateful. We see, and I believe you see from the applications that were presented last year, that subsidy for those, well, most of the projects coming forward are coupling this with state credits, which means to achieve the 60% average affordability, as the previous speaker said, you're going to need to have some units at 50, 40, 30, whatever it is that offsets the amounts up. And so we do think, also the name of the program, I was originally reading it middle income, but it's actually, the name of the program is mixed income. So I do think it's appropriate to think about how you will fund those units below 60 to achieve the income averaging so you can access the credits. And again, without seeing anything specific beyond what's in the board package about these other projects, it's clear from the actions that are requested that they needed both the per unit subsidy, which was offered as part of the 2019 program, and the state credits. I understand the concerns around the complications of layering HCD. Believe me, I understand that. That is my life. And so I would suggest maybe a simpler way to address the issue would be to return to the process you had previously, where this program can be the one-stop shop program to provide some of that subsidy that's needed at those 40, 50, 30% income levels to make it feasible. Because again, the developers that went forward, which I think many of you would agree would be for-profit, cost-effective, if they need it, everyone is going to need both of those pieces. That's my primary comment. I also would just suggest around readiness and also around developer fee, I think as much as possible, I know this is a refrain you hear all the time, if we could defer to the TCAC. There's already TCAC readiness requirements, there's already CIDLAC bond readiness requirements, and then TCAC has developer fee limits. And I would say as much as possible to defer to those. There was one other thing I noticed that I wasn't completely sure I read correctly, that you're suggesting that the minimum debt coverage ratio be now, or the max be 1.2, which is a little bit higher than the norm. I'm curious about what's driving that. And maybe connected to that, I would echo the comment that the speaker from MidPenn made around, I think it really would be prudent to make sure we're providing some public benefit and also to secure economic feasibility that, rents really be targeted to 10 or 20% below market. Because why is the state subsidizing things that are so close to market? And I worked in a community where, during one of the last downturns, the rent limits went below market rate limits, and that's no good for anyone. So thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you, Katie. Mr. Stivers, Mark.
Good morning, Mark Stivers of the California Housing Partnership, and our staff underwrites about 100 projects a year, so we share, and we have a number of our developers who are very interested in working with them in the mixed income program. We share your interest in making that program as successful as possible, and we have a couple of constructive suggestions that we would just like to offer that we think would increase the number of people who would apply to the program, and ultimately then the number of mixed income units that we can actually construct. I wanted to talk first about sort of the HCD's, the prohibition on using HCD funds. We appreciate the fact that we are trying to create units above 60% AMI here. That's a good thing. We appreciate that we might want to use the CalHFA funds only for those upper income units. That is okay. But in our analysis of the various projects, we have a number of developers who are looking to do MIP projects. The tax credits, the state tax credits, are not enough to fund the units under 60% on their own. There needs to be some additional subsidy. And these projects are going to have units under 60 because, as other speakers talked about, to get this tax credits under income averaging, you're going to have units below 60 for every unit you have above 60. And so ending the prohibition on using of HCD funds will allow those lower income units to get the subsidy they need. It will make the projects feasible, which in turn helps us meet the entire goal of having the higher income units, because you can't have the higher income units without the lower income units. Alternatively, you could provide, as Katie suggested, you could provide subsidy to the MIP subsidy to units under 60% AMI, but lifting the HCD prohibition would probably stretch your funds a little bit further. I also just want to touch briefly on, again, the buffer of rents below market. We would support that the 81 to 120% units have at least a 10% buffer below market rents. There have been downturns in the economy in the last 20 years. At least twice, rents have dropped more than 10%, and we put the projects at risk of foreclosure if they can't achieve the rents that they are projecting. It also sort of adds to the public benefit. And then just very briefly, we would encourage you to mirror the TCAC rules on developer fees. The current proposal will have a kind of a disproportionate impact on those mid-sized projects that aren't already deferring a huge amount of fee under the TCAC rules. We would also ask that you eliminate the cap on the MIP loan amount at 50% of the permanent loan amount. Any project that has a significant number of ELI and low-income units is not going to have a lot of permanent debt, and so that would severely restrict the amount of MIP money that would be available to that project. And we also would encourage you to make the MIP loan 55 years. We think there are going to be some problems with projects passing the true debt test if they have to pay back the MIP loan in 18 to 20 years, and then they're subject to rental restrictions for 55 years. And then lastly, in the interest of reducing project costs, we really encourage you to make the MIP funds available during construction. We agree with Jeff that reducing costs here is a very good thing. And if those funds can come in early, the projects don't have to pay interest on a large construction loan during the 2 year construction period. And actually one more, I said lastly, but we would encourage you to have the 180-day closing deadline be coterminous with the last of the TCAC, CIDLAC, or CalHFA award. Right now, the CIDLAC and TCAC awards are going to come last, but 2 months after MIP makes its award, and that will actually give them really only a 4-month closing deadline to close, which is going to be very, very tight for folks. So anyway, those are our suggestions. We really want this program to be a success. We want the developers to be able to access it and their projects to be feasible so that we can achieve both the low income and the moderate income units. And we think that some of these suggestions would actually help us achieve those policy goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Mr. Chairman, can I have 2 questions for him?
Yes, please.
If you don't mind. Thank you, Mr. Starkey.
Yeah.
Just 2 quick questions. Given the recent cap on increases in rents throughout the state of California, would you change your comment or your evaluation about having the market rate rents set at 10% below the market?
So I think our concern there is not with rents going up, which is what the rent cap bill does. It's actually with rents coming down in an economic downturn.
Okay.
If the project rents are close to market, let's say they're only 7% below market rents, and the market dips by 10%, the project is also going to have to lower its rents, which is good for tenants, but it's going to put that project at economic feasibility. The risk of foreclosure increases, and if we foreclose, we lose all affordability on the project. We want these projects to succeed, and we think having a little bit bigger cushion would actually ensure their long-term viability.
Okay. And then the second question I had, and thank you for that, I thought that was important to talk through. The second is of making the funding available during construction. How would that be seen in the context of the 50% test that you have to achieve for the CIDLAC? For the bonds?
Yeah.
Do you see that layering or that stacking being an issue?
Well, it could be. I think the MIP loan is going to be probably is not the lion's share of the funding for the project. Hopefully they will still be able to meet the 50% test. Obviously, if not, then maybe that doesn't work in that particular context. But I think for a lot of projects who would be able to meet the 50% test, that construction period savings would be a huge benefit to them and to the state.
Great. Thank you.
For those questions, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Congratulations on your new job, buddy. Thank you. Nice to see you.
There's a couple of questions I'd like Kate to expand on if I could.
Yes, please.
So Kate, if you could speak to the targeting below the market that Alice and Mark mentioned as one, I'd like you to speak to. Mirroring the rules of the developer fees of TCAC and CIDLAC, and the true debt test. Those 3 things, if you could speak to those 3 things.
Yes, ma'am, I'd be happy to. First, Mark and I did have a conversation over email about holding the units, having the requirement for 7% be the maximum requirement that CalHFA would require. And our purpose there is really, you're going to see a permanent lender respond more to the market. A permanent lender might hold, when I was a commercial banker, we routinely required that we underwrite to a 15% below market or 10%, depending on the market. But what we're trying to do is not drive that. We're trying to let the permanent first mortgage lender drive that. And so what we don't want to do is hold things at a level where in some markets, 10% might be too much. So what we're trying to do in a subordinate lender role is do what we think from our risk perspective makes sense. I do understand what everybody is saying, but I think for our purposes, 7% is where we were. If a permanent lender comes in and says 10% or 15%, that's really what's going to drive the market. Ours is just a minimum. It's not an upward limit. So that is really purposely for us to do that. One of the other comments that Mr. Stivers made that I would just like to clarify is the timing of closing 180 days from the last allocation. Generally, CalHFA's final commitment, which would, depending on size, come to the board for approval, is after the CIDLAC and TCAC allocation. So by going to the earlier, what we're trying not to do is end up being 30, 60 days, 45, 60 days behind TCAC and CIDLAC's final allocation with our final approval and commitment and have that push out, so that's why that language is, and it does look a little wonky, but just knowing our own internal process and the requirements that we have to bring these to the board, that would be something there. The other thing that I think Mr. Stivers,
The true debt test.
I'm sorry?
True debt test and wanting to go out to 55 years.
Oh, going out to 55 years and the true debt test, basically I understand. I think we won't, my expectation is that that won't be an issue on these deals. I think our bigger risk on the true debt test is layering too many subsidies one on top of the other. But to the extent that we have a true debt test issue on any individual deal, we will address that, but I just don't expect that. I understand what the issue is. We've talked through this, and based on our analysis and consultation with some of the others on the TCAC committee for regulations for 2022, who are developers, that didn't come out as we ran through the calculations as a real concern, but that is something that we have an eye to. And then there was one other, Tia, that you asked me to address. Availability during construction, I think, no?
Did mirror developer fees? How would that impact us?
That is something I think that, we've had a lot of comment on, and today's comments don't necessarily surprise me, and I think we're going to take all of these comments back and look at them and go through them again. But that is something that I think, if it makes the process simpler, it probably makes sense. But we need to look at it and assess it and go through the process.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask, can you explain what our position is on the developer fee?
Our position on the developer fee, well, I think what the question is that if they can't pay the developer fee back by the time, by is it year 16, Mark? 17? What? By the time the loan matures, the permanent loan, and it goes out of the compliance period, then there would be a huge recapture on the tax credits. And generally what you see in a pro forma is we require that to be repaid, the deferred developer fee, because it does go into basis. And so what happens if there's not sufficient cash flow to repay that is there's a capital call on the general partner of the partnership. And in my experience, I've even seen an investor come in and lend the money to a general partner to pay their deferred developer fee to preserve the tax credits. So that's, it's a concern. It's something we look at on every single deal we do and that we test for. So we can look at that. I think TCAC requires that I have to look at the regs for sure, but I think they require that the cash flow cover it to year 15. And our requirement is really, we require that it be paid, and not quite often, but I'd say since I've been here several times, I've seen pro formas where that has not been repaid from cash flow, but from a capital contribution at the end of the term.
Good. We have 2 more comments. Dixie, Laura, Bowes. Did I get it right or mess it up?
Hi, good morning. I don't really have very much more to add than what my colleagues have said. Previously, I'm Dixie Lyra Baus with Eden Housing. One of the things that we have been working on for several years is coming up with the mathematical solution for the missing middle. And I'd say that we are as close as we have ever been, but we're not there yet. And that is when we're leveraging other dollars, which this program allows, the best leverage that we're able to get is the tax credits. And in leveraging the tax credits, we're still seeing a gap at the end of the day when we're maximizing the income averaging and everything. So a range of units from 40% AMI to 120% AMI, is we're still seeing a need for overall gap financing in the amount of around $150,000. And so where I'm not able to do that, or where I'm not able to pick up that gap is in counties that are still very large job-producing counties, areas like Sacramento County, areas like Monterey County, areas like Alameda County, which are higher AMIs, which generally get the higher rents on the back end, but there's still a large gap subsidy that has to be produced because we're precluded by going over 60% AMIs. That's the only comment I have. The rest of it is excellent stuff. It's been a pleasure to work out some of the math over the years with various members of the staff. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Dixie, hang on one sec. Tia?
So if the program went to, if MIP, instead of 60 or 61, because we've already heard that you have to do it in 10% tranches, if it went to 50% AMI and above, would that be able to help with some of that gap that you're talking about?
It helps a little bit. I closed the gap by using project-based vouchers on the 50 and the 40% with the 25%. So there is a way to get there.
And local funds too? Are you bringing local funds to the table?
Very little local funds available in the counties that I specified. So fee waivers are willing to do that,
okay.
But there's just no dollars. There's no cash.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Spahn, Bill Spahn.
I'll try and be real quick. Basically, just want to support all the comments that were made before. I've been in the business for 34 years, and this is really a wonderful opportunity to provide housing for the mid-range income families. And in my position, I'm doing the entitlement process on these projects, and this is going to make it a lot easier on myself. Because a lot of the feedback that we get from communities is that we're providing very deep targeting housing, and to be able to provide housing for more mid-income families will be very beneficial. And it's being received very well, not only by staff, but also elected officials in communities. So I am very much supportive of it and look forward to being able to use the program going forward. Would also like to see and provide, I support being able to serve down to 50% of AMI rather than the 61%. So I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Past noon. I think we beat that one down. We all right there? Moving on to the next item, guys.
Are there any other questions?
I would just like to understand from a timing standpoint when the team would like to come back with an updated program that incorporates perhaps some of these good public comments that we've heard.
So let me give a wrap-up of how I would like to play this out. If there's direction that the board would like to give, I think now would be a good time to provide some direction. The things that from a timing perspective, what I'd like to do is take all these comments in, and then we were going to gather internally. We would submit it out for potentially one more round of comments, and then we were going to finalize the term sheet. So any direction from the staff board now, it would be good for staff to hear that now, because we'd like to be able to finalize the term sheet and get that posted.
If I may then, I mean, to Eileen's question earlier, I don't know that I've yet to hear a compelling reason not to provide the optionality on the project versus unit question. So, I mean, to the degree, wherever you land, to be able to explain that, I mean, even your response to, I mean, I'm fully supportive of not double stacking on the units, but it seems to me if a developer is creative and wants to go through a competitive process HCD, which we know and acknowledge could be difficult given the makeup of that project, I don't know that I want to preclude or prejudge them with ability to do that. So even your presentation says units, not projects, right? So it doesn't say in the term sheet the project versus unit piece. So you gotta, I think, have to clarify that in some way. And certainly we've heard some public comment that I think advocated for certainly not double stacking the subsidy on a unit basis, but maybe not disallowing on the project basis. So certainly I think that's something I'd love to, you guys to noodle on, and happy to talk about it or make our staff available to talk about that too.
Just one comment is, we're in the 10 years into an economic expansion, and we've seen, pretty wild swings in incomes, as the speaker from Mid-Peninsula noted, particularly in the Bay Area. You have these dramatic increases, which can turn in a downturn. And so I think I heard you say that market rate sensitivity, that 7% gap, was not prescriptive, that it's, allowing the first lien lender to dictate. But I just want to be mindful of that and careful about how we're framing that, and so that we're not, that we're permitting the fact that we're in the fluffy days here in some markets, and then that can change.
Agree. And I've seen commercial lenders require up to 20%, so depending on the market. So what we're trying to do is not drive that final determination, but I appreciate that.
I just, I totally appreciate the idea of cost containment. I think we just went over 500,000 per unit in Fresno, which is really shocking, right? So, and I know that that's probably still a lot lower than what's happening throughout the rest of the state. But I also have, so I'd love to know whether, it's not, I think we need to look at cost containment, but I'd like to know what those policies are. I am also the manager of housing that had cost containment put into it in the 1937 Housing Act that led to really poor housing being built. And so I want to make sure that, that as we look at cost containment, we're not harming the housing. So I think market studies, I'm a little nervous about allowing that dictating what is the 7% below what is market, and I'd love to know a little bit more about how is that going to work. And then I know it's been said, and I think Zach said it the best, right? But I get it, that adding in, for me, it's like no place like home. But adding that into a mixed income development makes a lot of sense, and just preclude that, to me, is just not appropriate. And so if I choose to do that within a development, or if someone chooses, I think it's great. And to stop them from doing that, I think is totally inappropriate.
Press the
It's a
little green
lower
button.
right.
Press the
It's a
little green
lower,
button.
lower right.
The little
red thing.
screen. Little button.
Oh, there we go. I actually come here for CalSTRS, but it's a different system. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and all the work. I am curious just about the smaller jurisdictions and rural areas. I know we've had some conversation about this, but some of the necessity of having some additional subsidies, especially from HCD, if in this next round we could really make sure we seek a lot of input from those folks, just to make sure that that we are fully aware of sort of all the jurisdictions in the state. This is, the whole Regions Rising thing is a really big deal in the administration. And I'm just curious if, and I don't know, Mr. Prince, if this is part of your experience, but if those folks need more of a way to consolidate funding from around the state in different programs in order to achieve the same things as other areas in the state. So if we could seek feedback on that for the next round. And then I don't fully understand the true debt limit, so I would love Tia, maybe a primer on that. Thank you.
Good. I think Delilah has some comment.
What I'd like to request, if staff could please, since we've allocated 69 million of the state credits from the allocation, if we could get kind of a report back on how those units or how those projects fare relative to the proposed new term sheet, just so that we understand what deviations we made by forward committing or allocating those $69 million, from a non-over-the-counter process. And that report back would be helpful. I think, my experience with mixed income has been in markets where you can support the higher rents at 120% AMI, and that those rents help offset the lower income units, the lower targeting, so that the rent that you're getting on that 120% AMI unit is really helping to subsidize the rent that you're not getting on that 40% AMI unit. So to me, having units averaging at 81% or 60% of median income in a mixed income project doesn't quite achieve the utopia of what a mixed income project really should look like financially. But I understand that this is an iterative process, and it's going to take us, a bit of time to get that formula exactly right. So in the spirit of that, what I'm wondering is, because we've had so much good public dialogue and input, it would have been nice to have it sooner, but, now that we have it and there's attention on the program itself, perhaps what we can try to do is kind of compromise and say, we'll make $75 million available over the counter under the new term sheet, and then we are able to revisit what that feels like and looks like and what kind of response we get.
And when you say $75 million, are you talking about in MIP funds or state
No,
tax
in the
credits?
state credits that come along with our MIP funds, right? So if we have right now we would have $140 million going forward in 2020, even after the allocation of 18 million.
130 million, I believe.
Okay, so we would have $130 million in MIP, and then the state credits are, that valuable resource that we're trying to leverage.
I'm sorry, the state credits would be 130 million after the 2019, after Resolution 1919 that we just approved.
And then how much in the MIP funds?
We will have 180 million when you add the SB2 funds to the 140 million in AB 101 funds going into our 2020 MIP program.
Okay, so I guess I'm not, what I'm advocating for is not necessarily the dollar amounts, but just kind of creating a smaller program as opposed to making all the money available over the counter under a program that may or may not be responsive to the comments that we've received from the public. If we could make it, a smaller program and then evaluate the effectiveness of that program and come back and review it as a policy perspective, that might be helpful in terms of being responsive.
And we will do that. I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of the nimbleness. The term sheets, we have the ability to amend the term sheets to adjust to the market. We don't have to bring those back to the board. This really was this was meant to be a policy conversation, to be that public process for the revisions that we were looking at. But we will continually evaluate and continually inform the board of what we're seeing, what we're hearing back. But we do have that ability to do that flexibility so that while it's going out, we can evaluate and report to the board as well. So it's anybody's guess. People are telling us that the state tax credits are going to be oversubscribed, but I'm waiting to hear feedback. Like, what did the applications come in 2015? How many did we see?
Right.
Bonds are going to be competitive. We're here. So we're kind of in this weird place where we do need to continually evaluate and be flexible. And we are going to do that and continue to be responsive to the board.
And on that point, was the 2019, the applications that came in, was that more or less than you guys were anticipating?
In state tax credits?
No, just for the MIP program generally.
We were fully subscribed.
Okay.
We were oversubscribed initially, but we had several applications that didn't meet all of the prerequisites and were kicked out. So we were fully subscribed. When one fell out, we had some leftover, but that was only at the end of the process.
So we had projects that didn't meet minimum threshold?
We had 2 projects initially, I believe, that came in that didn't meet minimum threshold. They had no readiness, they had no site, they had, they didn't meet the conditions.
But everyone that met minimum threshold pretty much got funded?
Yes, and then one fell out.
All right, good. Hey, excellent discussion. Thanks everyone for that input. Thank you, comments from the public, very helpful. And Kate, we look to hear back from you and Tia. Before we move on to the next item, I do want to report out that the audit committee met earlier this morning. And during our meeting, we of course approved the minutes. We heard from new IT updates from our IT director. We also heard for an update on the current audit and us pending some additional information from the state controller. And then, of course, finally, we, as usual, reviewed our charter and determined that we would continue to meet twice a year. So wanted to share that with the rest of you. Delilah or Jovan, any other thoughts on that? No. Great. With that, I'd like to move to closed session to discuss a personnel matter. So I'd like everyone to exit the room with the exception of Jennifer. Out of closed session where we discuss the performance and evaluation of a public employee and move to item number 9. Jennifer, are you going to comment or do you want to say something for us there?
So after your evaluation of Tia Boatman-Patterson, then you have an opportunity to, if you would like to discuss any adjustments to salary.
Yes, go ahead.
So I would like to make the recommendation to increase the executive director's salary by 5%. I believe that is commensurate with the level of effort that she has put forward over the past year, as well as performance. It's a merit-based increase that aligns well with the performance, as well as with the ambitions for the business case for CalHFA.
Good. Do we need a motion or second or discussion?
I think so.
Motion?
I'll move. Second.
That sounded like a motion.
I think Dr.
I'll move or second.
Moved it.
Whatever.
Moved, is it in second?
I think it's a unanimous.
I think Eileen seconded, so we had a motion and a second. Discussion, I guess? No discussion, public discussion. All right, roll call, please.
Ms. Avila Farias? Ms. Gallagher? Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Imbasciani?
Yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Aichi?
Yes.
Mr. Olmsted?
Yes.
Ms. Von Koch-Liebert?
Yes.
Mr. Prince?
Yes.
Mr. Russell? Ms. Sotelo?
Yes.
Resolution 19-20 is approved.
Awesome, thank you.
I want to thank the board, and I want to thank you for the confidence that you've had on me, and I want to thank you for the support and how you always push CalHFA and myself to be better leaders and better employees, so thank you.
Good.
I don't know what you got to that side. We had to convince them of it.
Thank you.
It's this side that can.
Just so you know, I will sit down with you next week and go over some of the comments in private session with you, with the board set, but as you could tell, general enthusiasm.
Thank you.
All right, I want to draw everyone's attention to item 10, which is the reports available, the standard reports that come with this. I know we've heard a lot from the public, but I want to encourage any public members to come up and speak one more time if there are any. If not, we're adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.